Thank you. Good evening. Let me repeat that again. I was intending to hit the wall. Didn't do a good job. There we go. I just changed the seacoast of China. Why are you looking at me like that? Do you think I'm nuts? Yes, some people are shaking their heads. No, I just changed the seacoast of China by taking that piece of chalk and throwing it across the stage, hitting the wall. I changed the seacoast of China. No, really, I did. Think about it. I'm standing here, the wall is there, but it's the process in between that matters. See, what you don't see, it's what is invisible to you and to me. And we have a physics teacher here, Mr. Covert, who can probably substantiate what I say. Because what I did is I put a process in motion. Democritus, an ancient Greek philosopher, spoke about the atom. And what I just did by throwing that piece of chalk across this room, I put a process in action. Molecules hit other molecules, hit other molecules, hit other molecules. At the atomic and even the subatomic level, that after a while, I don't know how long, and I don't know to what effect, I just changed the seacoast of China. Actually, recently I had the chance to go to China, and I've thrown that chalk many times. I don't know if I made any difference whatsoever, but part of an action, there is a reaction. So I'm hoping that my actions will have positive reactions and will do something more beautiful, something better than what was before. Because you see, everything is interconnected. So I did go to China. I toured 4 cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Shizuoguang, and Xi'an City. And in Shizuoguang, you would see a tree in the middle of a field. Looks great, right? Looked great to me. However, what was around it was alarming. He had a coal factory. How many of you remember black coal? Well, maybe one person. In New York City, when I was growing up, I remember you called it soot. And I was surprised in Beijing, people took brooms from their cars, and I was wondering, what are they doing with those brooms? What they were doing is wiping the soot off the windshield of their cars. I couldn't believe it. See, because a tree doesn't exist in and of itself, it exists in the surrounding. And the surrounding was alarming to me, that that tree would exist in a polluted environment. That is not beautiful. That is ugly. Our job is to do something that's more positive. Even if it is infinitesimal, our existence on earth in this universe makes a difference. Another Greek philosopher said that you can't step in the same water twice. It's always changing. In fact, the only thing permanent is change. Everything changes all the time. It's our job to rein in that change and try to improve, strive to improve. And this is part of the evolutionary process. And for me, this is why I became a teacher. I became a teacher because it was a profession where I actually could do that goal of making things more beautiful and less ugly. And I begin with a personal story, and the story of learning to care. I found out early on from my teachers that teaching is not just a job. Instead, it's a higher calling. Teachers sacrifice. Teachers, good teachers, trust their students and empower their students. And one thing I was taught from all of my teachers at any level is the importance of the golden rule, that you treat others as you yourself want to be treated. And I give you 2 examples. On the left is Mr. Olinsky. He was my junior high school math and biology teacher. What was his first job? Teachers, I don't know if you know this, but if you start teaching, at least when I started teaching, I didn't make enough money to pay my rent, to pay for my food, all the necessities, not at all. Mr. Olinsky was one of these teachers who went beyond what he should be doing. Every Friday was softball Friday in Central Park. We played 3-on-3 basketball in the courts of New York City. He didn't have to do that, but he thought it was important enough that he took us kids at the time and took us to an activity that was meaningful. To the right is my varsity basketball coach, Mr. Beard, and I made the varsity basketball team in the 10th grade, not because I had any talent. In fact, I still don't have any talent, but because I played the game hard and I ran up and down the court. But I remember after making the team, the second week, my father was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and I did not know if he was going to live or die. I was absent from school for 2 weeks. We were trying to determine as a family, what do you do? And it was pretty early at the time, you know. You didn't have radiation. It was just new. Chemo was just new. So the choice is, do we let my father die, or do we undergo some kind of radiation treatment? And I remember after 2 weeks, I returned to school, and I went into Mr. Beard's office, and I apologized. And I said, sorry, Mr. Beard, you know, I had to be my dad, because I didn't know what was going to happen. And I said, well, if you need to give the spot on the team to somebody else, I would certainly understand that, because I didn't want to take the position of somebody else. Mr. Beard did not say a thing. His first reaction to me, he just hugged me. And then he put his hands on my shoulders. And he said something nobody else said to me until that point. And I still remember this. He said, Harry, are you okay? That meant so much to me, because nobody else had ever said that to me. And I remember I broke down crying. I guess I needed to cry after 2 weeks. I learned to be challenged. Mr. Callahan, my history and humanities teacher in high school, he never used a textbook. In fact, I didn't know what a textbook was until I first started teaching. I had no idea that people use textbooks. Instead, you know my position, get rid of them. We don't need other people to interpret for us what other people say. We have a brain, we could use it ourselves. Get rid of the textbooks. He made us read. In fact, he acted the original text. He would go and climb up on students' desks, his own desk. He would climb up and he would read Bismarck or John F. Kennedy by heart. And he would act that role. And we were inspired. He told us to avoid others' interpretation. And we should not and never accept the author at his or her word. Challenge the author every single time. And finally, he told me one important thing, that in order for life to be meaningful, it must come from the heart. It must come from the place in your heart where love resides. Because unless we begin from that, then life cannot be more beautiful. It will remain ugly. Years later, Mr. Callahan, this is at a reunion 3 years ago. He is not doing so well, but he felt it was important enough to join us in my class. Then there was another teacher, Mr. Woods. I'm a little bit older than some of these folks, some of you, and I remember it was 1982 or 1983, and it was the first Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. Just passed. And I was surprised that some states like Arizona still resisted, could not believe it. Even our president at the time resisted having that holiday, I remember. I could not believe it. But Mr. Woods came on stage, and Mr. Woods was Dr. King's neighbor in Alabama. So whatever threats Dr. King received, he felt the effects. But one story I'll never forget. Mr. Woods talked about going to school one day, and bullets came after him, and he had to hide behind a car. And I could not imagine, A, he went to segregated high school, and B, just going home he was shot at because he was black. I just did not understand that whatsoever. But he persevered, and he leads by example. So I decided to teach. because I was inspired by my teachers. And that's a copy of a flyer that I picked off one of the recruiting stations at Fordham University. I went to undergraduate school. It says, "Help refugee children in the Bronx. Find out more." So I did. And for 2 summers, I taught ESL students. They were both children from Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. They didn't have any parents. They were trying to escape communism. And there they're sent to the Bronx, Central Bronx, and my job was to teach them English and to keep them away from gangs. That was my job. Now here I am, 21, 20 years old. I really did not know what I was doing. But these kids taught me more than I could ever possibly teach them. And their stories were heartwarming. Then I became a high school teacher, and I had this one student, 6'6", 250 pounds, one day come to me after class, and he said, "Mr. L," said, "you got to see this. I can't believe it." I said, "What's wrong, Sean? What's wrong?" And he shows me a photo. And it was a photo of Anita Hill and a gorilla. And the caption read, "Anita Hill and her mother." Now, this was a black student. And he was distraught. He said, "Mr. L, I can't believe this is happening." The same student who gave the photo was also a member, I found out, of the National Association of the Advancement of White People. And frequently in class, he would bring literature from this group denigrating other races. You know, I do believe in freedom of speech as a teacher, even in classroom, so I'll let him go on. But there was a healthy and robust discussion. So then I decided, you know, I have to do something about it. You know, I have to generate that change. Throw that chalk across the room and let it go. Make some kind of change. I'm not sure where it's going to go, so I started this class called The Study of Social Justice, where we spoke about racism, sexism, environmental issues, and other social justice issues, because to me, practicing what you preach is very important. So where am I today? I guess the best way to describe myself is a principled principal, because what I learned stays with me today. And I believe some of the educational reforms that Dr. George and others spoke about in reducing teachers and principals to a number, I believe that's wrong. A top-down approach. It's amazing to me that policies are made by people who have no idea about education. Imagine if I made policies for, let's say, the medical profession. Imagine if I made policies for the legal profession. We would revolt at that. But it is acceptable to have the people who are not professionals make decisions for us. So I decided to take a stand with other principals, with colleagues who are fantastic. And I've enjoyed working with them. I'm meeting new people all the time. And we try to bring these issues to the fore in terms of improving education, not for the ugly, but for the beautiful. Because as we saw tonight, as we heard by so many people, education can be a powerful force. And we have to continue with that force and not lose it. Teaching, to me, is like gardening. And I don't garden, but from what I know about gardening, if you think about a gardener who would go into an area and plant seeds into a soil, and you know, that flower may not bloom. May not bloom that day, that week, that month, or even after a year, and sometimes just forget about it. And then years later, guess what? The flower blooms. Well, teachers are like gardeners. We try to plant the seeds. We nurture, we provide the water, the sun, everything a student needs, but sometimes it doesn't work. But years later, a student may graduate and then come back. And then that student would say, "Look at me now, Mr. L. Look at what I'm doing." And Sean, that student I mentioned about who got the photo, came back 10 years later and said, "Mr. L, thanks for having my back." That meant a lot to me. A teacher's worth is priceless. You cannot put a number on it. I also go abroad. I traveled to school systems in Finland, Germany, Japan, and China. And what I learned is that other nations don't test their students to death. no matter what you may think about Asian nations, they don't do that. That's a misconception. What I found is that there are no such thing as multiple choice Scantron questions. Instead, they're open-ended questions. They pose problems, and students are expected to solve them in their own way, in their own mode of thinking. Vocational education is important. Not all of us will succeed in college. Not expected to. So vocational education is important. Accountability for teachers or principals, they looked at me, they didn't know what I was talking about. Instead, they used the word responsibility, because teachers and principals have a responsibility to their students and to their school. They don't track students like we do. We don't have AP, IB, they don't have AP, IB honors and regents and intensive and special, they don't have that. Everyone is there together, learning together. The most interesting part I found about China is the Communist Chinese government has undergone a series of reforms. And these reforms include, get this, creativity, right? Collaboration, and independent thinking. In fact, at one state office I stayed at the Hubei province, which is a large province in China, in eastern China. And I met with the equivalent of the commissioner, let's say our Dr. John King, our commissioner. And they were using American theorists to drive these reforms, like John Dewey, Marzano, Waters, and others. So we are very good at exporting ideas, but we're not very good at implementing our own ideas. We think, but we don't practice them here in our own nation. For me, education is a journey and not a race. Education does not begin or end at the school gate. Instead, we prepare students for not graduation, but after graduation. That's our job. Students are partners with teachers. They are in a symbiotic relationship that is not just teaching to the test. That's not what we do. But instead, it's a relationship that also includes the emotional and social part of becoming an adult as a teenager. I think Mr. Cellini referenced this before, that racing implies a winner and a loser, or the alpha and the omega, the beginning and an end. For a race, there's always an end. But education is a continuous journey as we experience new situations and people. Education is an invitation to walk, not to run. Also, I believe education is liberatory. It's a process of liberation. Students empowering themselves. Students not taking the status quo for granted. In fact, thinking about it. Challenging what's in front of you. Creating something new. Students thinking about the world around them and their own society. And finally, the ultimate compliment for a teacher, at least for me always was, when the teacher becomes a student and the student becomes a teacher. So I hope you join me once in a while in taking a piece of chalk, throwing it across the room, laying a crack, and changing the seacoast to China. Because believe me, you may think your action may mean nothing, but it means something. However small it may be, it means something. Never stop trying, and never stop making the world a more beautiful place and a less ugly one. Thank you.